take a look at the features of erosion and deposition. So first let's take a look at a waterfall. Now maybe you've seen one, maybe you've actually been over one. Waterfalls are actually gorgeous, gorgeous pieces of geology. And now waterfalls occur when a river spills over a sudden change in gradient or a sudden change in slope. And this usually undercuts the rocks by hydraulic action or impact and abrasion, things that we've talked about already. Undercutting the base usually causes an overhang, and sometimes that overhang collapses. If we take a look at this picture right here, this is the formation of a waterfall. So what we have is a bunch of water falling over this gradient here. Notice how steep this particular one is. Now the types of rock, we have different types of rock here. So as the water overflows this gradient, it's going to then erode away some of this softer rock that's right here. Because this is softer rock, this gets eroded away quicker than the hard rock down here. So as this water plunges over the side, it's going to start creating this little abrasion. Basically, all the material, all the sediment that's in this water is going to hit the softer rock, and it's going to create a little pool called a plunge pool. Now over time, we're going to get more of this rock cutting away, creating more of this undercutting underneath the soft rock. And possibly over time, all the softer rock will actually be eroded away. We're left with this hard rock, which actually might collapse. Now, we have causes of sudden gradient change. Now, what are the reasons basically for this sudden shape right here, this big slope? Well, coastal cliffs are a big one. Sometimes you see, especially in Maine and on the west coast, you see these huge cliffs just basically going straight into the ocean. You see bands of rock that's resistant to erosion, much like you see here. We have the hard rock and soft rock. Then we have something called a fault scarp, which is basically where we have a fault line due to earthquakes, and one side of the fault goes up, the other one moves down or might stay the same. So we have that sudden change in gradient for that particular area. Maybe we have a plateau edge, or maybe again it's hanging valley, and that's also due to faults where we have movement of the land either one way or another. So waterfalls are the first feature of erosion and deposition. So we'll talk more about this, of course, in class. We also see gorges. Now gorges are common where local rocks are extremely resistant to weathering, but are going to be susceptible to powerful river erosion. So when it says that it's very resistant to weathering, it's actually very resistant to the wind, the rain, things like that that are hitting the particular sides of the rock. So if we have wind grains, we have maybe precipitation hitting the sides. Maybe there's some sort of chemical weathering there that deals with some sort of chemical erosion. Now, those mean that it's very resistant to those things, but river erosion, river movement is going to actually create this rock to erode away. So we have a couple of causes of gorge development. They're all located on your screen. We have something called antecedent drainage. Basically, antecedent means before. So this is drainage that's already there. We have water that's already in place here, and perhaps it's already creating a gorge. Perhaps we have a retreat of the waterfall. So maybe the water doesn't flow anymore over a waterfall, but it has to go somewhere. Perhaps the gorge is due to surface runoff over limestone during a periglacial period. Now periglacial sort of means that it's perhaps this land is not really near, it's not frozen necessarily underneath a glacier, but it actually is near a glacier. So maybe it has a frozen period, but it's not actually glacial. It's not actually frozen for a long period of time, but it does get frozen because it's next to or near a glacier. Perhaps we have glacial overflow channeling. So we have all of this extra glacier just sort of overflowing. We have some of the water from the glacier that might have melted and it's sort of overflowing. And perhaps we have a collapse of underground caverns in limestone areas. We see this a lot in Florida, or areas that have huge limestone areas. Florida's one. We also see this a lot in the southeast, in Georgia, parts of South Carolina as well, Alabama. These are areas that have large limestone capabilities. We also see Piedmont alluvial fans and cones. Now here are two pictures of alluvial fans. Now fans or cones are actually deposits that sort of shape themselves into these fans or cones that are built up by rivers and streams. So as the river flows down, it deposits all of the sediment, but it just gets deposited in this fan-like pattern. So you can sort of see two of these here. Over on the left-hand side, we have one of those things that they're both cones, they're both fans, they look almost exactly the same. So you can kind of see how they're branching out like this into patterns that look like fans or into cones. So those are Piedmont alluvial fans or cones. The name the name is both. You can say alluvial fan or an alluvial cone. We also see things called rifles. Now these are small ridges of material that are deposited where the river velocity is reduced midstream, like in between pools. So if for whatever reason the velocity or the speed of the river slows down right in the middle, we see these little these materials, almost like bars. You saw those in when we were talking about stream flow in the braided rivers. So there's just these ridges of material that sort of are midstream, and these are because of the river velocity basically just slow down right in the middle. Finally, we see a couple things called levees and floodplains, and I do have pictures. I tried to choose a picture of kind of a drawing and one that's an actual picture. So levees and floodplains occur around big rivers. We see a lot of these down the Mississippi River. Now, these are deposits that are formed when a river flows over its banks over long periods of time. And what happens is all the deposition from that river, all the sediment gets deposited on the outside banks. Now we do see levees, and these are natural levees. And these are basically coarse deposits that are built up to form these embankments. Now in the picture on the left, you'll see that these are natural levees. These are just basically big piles of sediment. So we see some here. We also see some on the outside. These are terraces. These are basically built up from old levees. Now humans can create levees as well. Usually they're big cement blocks, and this prevents overflows of rivers. But this is the natural levee, so don't confuse the two. While they're pretty much the same, natural levees are formed from the river. These are the deposits from them. We also see floodplains, which are also called back swamps. Now this is where deposits are actually carried further away from rivers. Now we see a lot of agriculture in floodplains around the Nile River in Egypt. These are very rich, fertile lands. Now this allows a lot of different types of crops to be grown, which provides food for certain areas. They're very, very fertile. So in the picture on the left, so let's say this middle part's the active channel. The natural levee, this is the original, I shouldn't say the original, but this is the actual levee that's being produced now when this overfloods. And then we have the floodplain deposits kind of over back here. And then what we have over to the sides, we have the levees and then the levees and floodplains from really old deposits on both sides. Now they look like terraces. So if we take a look at the picture on the right, we can sort of see where these are. We see that we have the river over to the right-hand side of this picture. Those darker lines that run along the riverbank, these are your levees. And they're not as tall, perhaps. Maybe if you were standing down there, they'd look a little bit bigger. But then over on the opposite side of the road here, these are the flat floodplains. These are your very fertile lands. And if we probably were to widen out this picture, it might be some sort of agricultural land that we're looking at. Now, river bluffs are what I was sort of talking about before. These are these old terraces on both sides. Now, this is a line of relatively steep slopes at the edge of old eroded floodplains. So these guys are basically the old deposits of those levees and the floodplains from a long time ago. So the ones that are a little bit closer are the more active levees and floodplains. The ones that you see further apart, those are the older ones.